Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Menners, and it's the Mad Menners weekly edition. A bit late this week, caught up with the great Malcolm Conn earlier this week and released a fantastic interview with him on the Cricket Unfiltered feed. So if you missed that, it's the episode below this. Go back to it. We deep dived into a little bit of his career as a cricket writer going right back to the mid 80s. And yeah, we talked about a lot. It was an hour and 15-minute interview. And yeah, one of my favorite chats I've had in a long time. But Mad Menners is back. So for those that listened to the last Mad Menners, they will know that I started to preview the Australian team. I started going through each player and giving my thoughts on just what makes them tick. What have I seen covering this team for over 10 years now that I think sort of makes each player tick. So we're going to get to that. Before that, I think it's just it's prudent. I just want to talk about a bit of news around how the opening debate is shaping up for Australia, and also there was some big David Warner news today. But let's start with the Border-Gavaskar Trophy preview and the way the Australian team opener is looking. If you sort of read between the lines at the moment, it seems to indicate maybe Constas and Inglis are just a touch ahead of Harris and Bancroft. So I've got to stop watching the Marsh Cup while I'm doing this. I'm going to turn it off because I think someone just got out. Anyway, that's no good for people watching this on delay. So what I think is, I think Inglis fits the bill of being a counter-attacking opener. And those that listen to this show regularly will know I'm very concerned about a top order. And, I think there's other people in the cricket media who've cottoned on to my ideas that you can't have a defensive opener at the top. Bancroft, great player. He just cannot open with Khawaja, and he cannot have Labuschagne and Smith behind him. You've got four fairly conservative players in a row, and then you go into Head and Marsh. I just don't think it's a good combo. So I like Inglis because he's a counter-attacking player, but I do have concerns about it. He hasn't opened at first-class level. If they were thinking about him as a test opener, he should have been opening in the Shield, but it's complicated because the reason Inglis is in the frame is because he scored 200s to start the Shield season. And I think he's not going to play another Shield game because the one-day team gets together next week. So that's his opportunity to open in the Shield gone. But maybe if they're thinking about him opening in the Test, they could get him to open in the one-dayers. It's not the same, but I think they've already told Jake Fraser-McGurk he's going to open in the one-day. So there's a bit of jostling at the moment. But I think it comes down to an attitude thing. And if Inglis were to say, I want to open at test level, I can do it, I'm ready, then I think that's half the battle. You've got to want to do it. And he would be a counter-attacking batter. And if he could get through this series against India and average sort of between 35 and 40 and score fairly quickly, that would be a very good counter to Khawaja at the top of the order. I do think Constas is in the frame, and I thought his innings in the second innings of the recent Shield match, where he only made 40-odd, and he did throw his innings away, but he battled through some terrific bowling. He showed a lot of guts. He showed a lot of good sense, and it was a really testing time. Wickets were absolutely tumbling around him, and I almost think that 40 is an indication that he probably does have what's required to cut the mustard at test level. So, you sort of got Constas and Inglis who just seem to have moved away from the pack at the moment because of their irrepressible form. Now, as I said, Bancroft, I just don't think stylistically is the right fit. And then I guess Marcus Harris, I'd be happy to see Harris brought back into the side. I think he's a good player. Does he deserve another chance? I'm not sure if deserve is the right word, but he certainly has scored enough runs at domestic level to make a pretty good case for it. But I do, and he's younger. Like, how old's Harris? He's in his early 30s. So, if he were to come back into the side and do well, then, he could be a test player for 5 years. So, how old is 32? So, Khawaja, look at how many runs he's scored in his mid to late 30s. There's no reason Harris couldn't do the same thing. So if I'm George Bailey, I've narrowed it down to Constas, Harris, and Inglis. And then, it really does come to a little bit of, are you going to take a punt on the youngster? And, hopefully you throw Constance in there and he can, you know, hope, make a go of it at test level? Or do you just go, let's give Inglis a crack, go up there, play your shot, see what happens? I'm guessing at the moment Inglis and Constance are just in front of Harris. And I wonder if Inglis does well against Pakistan in the one-day series, whether that could sway him into opening in the test stuff. But it's an intriguing debate, and I do think they need to take a punt on somebody. That's why I'm leaning against Harris a little bit. Like, I think Inglis or Constance are probably the way to go. But instead, I want Inglis to come out and say something. I've been searching. I'm sure he's said I'll bat anywhere, because that's what everybody says. But I'd like to know if we, could probe a little bit more whether he's actually really up for the challenge. And I think that's what the selectors would do. They'd say to Inglis, are you up for this? Like, do you want to take on Bumrah with the new ball? Because if there's a shred of doubt, and Inglis would be well within his right to say, I've never opened the batting at first class level. I'll do it, but who knows how it's going to go. But if he's like, nah, let me do it, I'm ready to take these blokes on, how good would that be? And everyone knows who listens to Cricket Unfiltered, I am the biggest Josh Inglis fan. I love the way he bats. I love the way he keeps. And we are really lucky at the moment where Carey and Inglis, two of the form batters in the country, both wicket keepers. Carey scored 200s to start the season, so is Inglis. So Carey's spot is not in doubt. But then you bring Inglis in as an opener, and that does kind of put the squeeze on Carey at some point. If his batting just drops off a bit and Inglis keeps going well, at some point they can give Inglis the gloves and move him down to the middle order. And then maybe you bring a Constance in then. So that's the way the opening debate is going. It's fascinating. No clear front runner, but I would say Constance and Inglis are my two smokies and favourites at the moment. Well, favourites, not smokies. And then news around David Warner broke this morning. Big news. So his leadership ban has been lifted. So he can now captain a Big Bash franchise. Interestingly, this ban was lifted after he'd retired from all international cricket. So he can never captain Australia, which I don't think is a coincidence that it was granted now rather than while he was still playing for Australia. And I don't think they'll pick Warner for this series as the opener, even though he was joking about doing it. But in the statement by this Code of Conduct Commission that ruled on his leadership ban being lifted, they wrote that Warner no longer sledges opposition players. And I think that's true. But I would say that is some of the more hypocritical stuff I've ever seen from any organisation, because when Warner was sledging opponents, the coach at the time was telling him to sledge. So, like, Darren Lehman can coach Big Bash franchises and do all that kind of thing. He was never given a coaching ban for saying that to Warner. So I think Warner's kind of been hung out to dry with this whole thing. You might remember before last summer, I think they were trying to have the leadership ban lifted then, but because it was going to be a very public hearing, Warner decided not to do it because he wanted to concentrate on cricket. Well, this hearing was done in private and the leadership ban was lifted. I think it's a great thing. It's too late. It is way too late. But I think obviously the idea is you want to keep Warner engaged with Australian cricket. So if you lift the ban, maybe he can be the Sydney Thunder captain. Maybe he can captain another Big Bash franchise eventually. So it does open up more opportunities and might keep him more invested in the Big Bash rather than if he was just a player. But as I said, a little too late, and I have, done a lot of soul searching about Sandpaper Gate, and you can go back to listen to the podcast from 2018. I blew up Deluxe at the Aussie team, and it was, piss poor to take Sandpaper out onto the ground. But if you really dive deep into the context, there was a lot going on there, and I kind of think Warner was hung out to dry. And I said it with Malcon. Go back and listen to it. We disagreed with this on Tuesday, where I still think the media team in South Africa completely fucked that up. and they should have done better. Malcolm said he reckons, well, it's up to the players and the captain. You want to front the media. It's not up to the media team to step in. No, it is up to the media team. And in hindsight, if I'm reframing that story, because the story was, I'm sorry, but the South Africans pushed Warner over the edge with all the Sonny Bill stuff and going at his wife. I mean, heinous actions. And he was, he blew up and he lost it. And he was like, well, I'm not going to lose to these pricks no matter what. I'm going to, whether it means whatever it takes, I don't want to lose to these Saffers. And in the end, there was very regrettable actions. But you cannot you cannot forget the context. Lehman was saying, Warner, be our attack dog. You remember when he was brought back as coach, Warner was being called the Reverend at the time. And Lehman said, we've got to get rid of this Reverend stuff. We need the old bull back. So everyone was egging him on. So they have to take some responsibility for it. So if I'm the media team, I can reframe that story to be Warner pushed over the edge by heinous actions of South African crowds. And you look at the Me Too movement, that stuff was despicable, what they did to Warner. And yeah, so I think it's too little, too late for Warner, but I'm glad he got the leadership ban finally lifted. All right, so that was the couple of bits of news I wanted to touch on. But now let's get into my preview of the Australian team. Well, it's sort of like a bit of an editorial on the Australian team and what makes each player tick. So I've done the top three, and I went through a couple of openers, but let's pick up at Steve Smith. What do I think of Steve Smith as a person, as a batter, as a cricketer? What do I think his makeup is all about? So I sort of have some insights into him as a junior cricketer, because I knew someone whose son played with Steve growing up through the underages. And what he displayed at that age has flowed directly into his career as a professional cricketer. He is ultra competitive. I mean, most people that make it at the top level are ultra competitive. But Smith is, right at the pinnacle of that competitive edge. Like, he just hates losing. And more importantly, he hates it when a bowler gets on top of him or gets the wood on him or gets him out. That's why he's never out. Like, he's always remonstrating when he gets out, because in his mind, he's better than the bowlers always. And he's ultra competitive. And that's part of, I think, the reason why when he was Australian captain and things weren't going well, he really struggled. Like, he was a very hot and cold Australian captain, very emotional. He would blow up when things weren't going his way. You could see him, being very emotional in the field, which is not good captaincy. The best captains, Mark Taylor, Steve Waugh, to a lesser extent, Ricky Ponting, because I don't think he was a great captain, but, say Steve Waugh and Mark Taylor. You look at them, you really wouldn't know the stage of the game. And that's the way you should captain. Chew your gum, look steely. And, if things aren't going your way, if catches are going down, you've got to try and, as captain, bury those, reactions for the sake of the team. So I think that's one area he found difficult as captain. And I do think, it explains a lot of his makeup. Like, he is very, very competitive, very emotional. And I think as well, he's a little bit stubborn. And we've seen this in, recent times. He can just be a little bit stubborn. He's sort of, but you sort of need that, as I said, to be a top level professional. Sometimes having that little bit of stubbornness and, being resolute, like opening the batting last summer. He was very clear at the time he wanted to do that. He was apparently Labuschagne and Khawaja were telling him what a terrible idea it was, but he put his best foot forward, and he was pretty stubborn about wanting to do it. And I think that sort of is a lot of his makeup. Very competitive, a little bit stubborn. And as I said about Khawaja when I talked about him, you need that sort of arrogance and attitude sometimes to cut the mustard at the top level. But there's no doubting his period of dominance is the best I've ever seen a player, probably along with Ricky Ponting. Ricky Ponting had about 4 or 5 years where he averaged around 60 in Test cricket like Steve Smith did. So I think they're the sort of two best periods I've ever seen for an Australian batter. Steve Waugh, still my favourite batter. His dominance was different in a sense that he was more a grafter, but and in a way, I mean, he did it against better attacks, probably. I mean, Steve Waugh's runs, I would say, were generally against better attacks than Ponting's and Smith. Not that they've faced pie chuggers by any means, but Steve Waugh did it against some of the best attacks ever. But yeah, so when I think about Steve Smith, I think he needs to be kept engaged with this Australian team now, and he's on a decline, and it's tough to see because he just hasn't. It's hard for him, I'm sure, when you can't recapture the form he showed a few years ago. But one of the true pleasures of doing this podcast has been covering basically all of Smith's career, and I've really enjoyed seeing him become just the most incredible batter and do amazing things. And you have to say, in the history of Australian cricket, apart from probably Alan Border, who was like Smith, no one apart from Alan Border has been able to thrive in all conditions like Smith has. I mean, you think about it. Multiple centuries in India, in everywhere in the subcontinent. He's unbelievable on those wickets. England in 2019 on green seamers, unstoppable. On Australian pitches, hard bouncy, unstoppable. So he is one of the best all-round players Australia's ever produced. All right, so that's Steve Smith. I wonder when he'll just pull the pin and go, yeah, I've had enough of this. But he's looking good. I think he's still a very good white ball player. And, actually there was a report from Peter Lawler recently about Smith being asked to present to the board his captaincy credentials when Cummins was made captain, when Payne had to retire. And I would have made Smith captain then. I think they should have made Smith captain then. I think we've seen Smith is a better captain than Cummins. Maybe not a better leader. I mean, there's no doubt Cummins is an inspirational leader off the field and is able to foster a beautiful environment. But that's not enough for me. Like, for some people it is, but for me it's not. And look, I get it for the players. I'm not a player, so I get where they're coming from. But I'm more a Smith guy who's like tactically astute, a batter, win at all costs mentality. I'm sure Cummins the same, but Cummins is all about the balance, and he's a bit more a Zen type of character. So I would have liked Smith to have been given another crack. I think as well he should have been given another crack, because I said about Warner at the top. Smith again hung out to dry when Sandpaper Gate happened. The board was trying to even up with the players because of the MOU. We talked about this with Malcon. Lehman was checked out as coach. Smith, a young captain, thrown into this, fiery series, just was not helped enough. So I really feel sorry for Smith. And there is some talk that Pat Cummins could miss the tour of Sri Lanka next year. And I'm sorry, but Smith has to be captain of that test series. It could determine the World Test Championship. The way he led the team when Pat Cummins went home from India in 2023 was exceptional. And yeah, I'm a huge Smith guy. All right, so with Smith, let's go to Travis Head, number 5. Head is your typical Aussie knockabout bloke. And they say that Adelaide, where he's from, is a big country town, and it is. And I think that's how you should look at Head, as just a country kid. He's just a good, salt-of-the-earth Aussie bloke. Loves his cricket, loves his golf, loves to hang out with the players, loves to have a celebration when they win, loves scoring runs for fun, loves to smash attacks. But he is just the quintessential Aussie bloke. He's not like the David Boone of our generation, but there's certainly qualities there, especially when he has the moustache. Like, he's a bit of our Boone. He likes to party on late at night and all that kind of thing. But as a player, so I've touched on this before, but he was made captain of South Australia at a very young age, and far too young. And this should be a lesson for all state associations. Make make your captains players that are established at that level. Like, I know you need to give young players captaincy experience. You got to do it somewhere. So, if you want them to captain Australia sometime, they've got to captain this. Well, it's good if they captain their state first, but 21's way too young. And it definitely curtailed his development as a batter. He said it. It just did, because at 21 he should be worrying about absolutely nailing first class cricket, not leading the whole team and worrying about all the other players. So, that was an erroneous decision. But here's the rub. I guess if he is made Australian captain one day, he had a really good lesson early on about how to do it. So he comes in with his eyes wide open. But not a lot to say about Head. He's been on the show a few times. Lovely, lovely man. And this whole Aussie team is very likable. I mean, there are no real pricks in the team. I mean, it's just, I'm not saying that's true in the past, and in the future there will be for sure. It's the way of the world, but he's a ripping bloke. All right, so we're Head at 5, then Mitch Marsh at 6. Actually, Mitch Marsh is someone haven't had a lot to do with, actually. I mean, he's been in and out of the test side, maybe because he's in Perth. I haven't had a lot of interviews with him, done a lot of press conferences and stuff. So he's probably one player I don't know personally that well. But again, everybody loves him. I mean, he's a vibes guy. You need a vibes guy in the dressing room. He's your vibes guy. He's when you're having a party and you're like, need some people to keep the vibe going. He's someone you'd invite. Like, let's get the vibes going. Just a terrific guy. Always can laugh at himself. And as a cricketer, I don't think he's going to play much more Test cricket. Like, I just can see him being out of this side pretty quickly. I don't think he's a good cricketer, but I think he's a better white ball player, because I actually think he's kind of a hitter. It's actually, to me, not a classical Test player. I know that sort of belies his good form he's shown recently at Test level, but even if the way you look at, he defends the ball, he goes really hard at it. And yeah, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong and he thrives at Test level for the next few years, because no one, deserves it more than him. He's taken so much shit. If you go back to the first few years of this podcast, go back to 2013, I was very high on Mitch Marsh. I watched a lot of him in the Under-19 World Cup that he won with Hazelwood and co. when they won, I think, in New Zealand. And I was really high on Mitch Marsh. I was like, this is going to be the Marsh that actually nails Test level. Like, Jeff and Sean, good cricketers, but never could have bust that batting average above 40 at Test level and nail down their spot. I thought Mitch Marsh is going to do it. Look at him, the Bison, let's go. But he hasn't been able to do that. He's sort of, when he's in form, he can really dominate Test attacks, but there's no in between. It's like rocks or diamonds with Mitch Marsh, and that's my big concern with him. But again, vibes guy, terrific fella. I can see him still playing a lot of white ball cricket for Australia. And I do think he was kind of hung out to dry at the last T20 World Cup. He wasn't given the captaincy far enough before the tournament, I thought. There was sort of dithering around of who might lead. Maybe Pat Cummins would do it. And eventually they landed on Mitch Marsh. I think they needed him to be captain 6 months to a year out. And, I think this selection panel does a lot of good things, but I do think they're a bit laissez-faire about some of this stuff, because I don't know, it's just like under Cummins and McDonald, there's sort of this vibe of, let's just sort of not drift, but I do think they kind of put things off for some reason, because Cummins, Cummins is a great captain. He looks good on the press releases and the photos and stuff. So it doesn't matter. We'll just make him T20 captain for the moment. And then if we need to change it to somebody else, we will. And that's what they did. And I thought it was unfair on Mitch Marsh. But as a bloke, so many stories about him and what a terrific guy he is. And he is always able to laugh at himself. So Mitch Marsh, big thumbs up. I'd like to see him play a lot more cricket for Australia, but I'm just a little concerned about how he's going to go this summer and then next summer. But please prove me wrong, Marsh, not Smash, it's his brother, Mitch Marsh. All right, next one, Alex Carey. What can you say about Alex Carey? Just all-time great guy. I'm like, he's been on the show a few times. I've commentated on a few domestic games. Had a lot to do with him. There is no nicer guy in cricket. That's it, full stop. And you look at his batting and keeping now. He's the consummate professional. He had some form issues with the bat, sort of leading into last summer and then during last summer, but he's come out of them. He is the type of Australian cricketer that board members and CEOs love. Never a foot out of step. Always says the right things. Always has a smile on his face, and yeah, he is just a gem. And I think he's got a lot of good cricket for Australia left in him. But I sort of think about the Bairstow incident. I actually think it was good for him because I don't think he'd ever received that kind of, well, and of course he had. He never received that kind of criticism, that kind of heat from the English public and the press. And I actually think it's hopefully been a good lesson for him because he needed a bit of toughening up because, hate to say it, not everybody's going to like you. Like you can be the nicest friggin' guy in the world like Alex Carey, and there's going to be people that don't like you. So this is a philosophical thing, just a humanity thing. Like as a human, you have got to accept not everyone will like you. And in fact, like if you're really at the top level of anything, you're going to get some hate. People are going to hate you. Tall poppy syndrome, envy, whatever it is. If you are, at the top, people are going to hate you. Not be everybody, but there'll be always be a few haters. And I think it's good for Alex to learn that. Embrace the hate. Like, if no one hates you, then you're irrelevant. That's what it comes down to. Like, people will have a reaction to you if you're important. Viv Richards used to say it. What did he don't? They don't. When they'd boo him when he came out to bat, they don't boo, lose, whatever. Viv Richards, I've got to go and find it now. But Viv Richards used to say, like, if you're getting booed, that means they respect you. And so I think it's been good for Carey because not everybody's going to like you. Certainly not if you're an Australian cricketer. So he needed to have that lesson, and he's spoken about it, sort of coming to terms with that. Now, he got the extreme version of it where it's so intense. But he spoke after going back to England recently for the one-day series about, he got sledged vociferously at Headingley, but I think he was ready for it and was able to accept it and deal with it better. So that's Carey, ripping bloke, and maybe the best I think will be a net positive for him. All right, number 8, Mitchell Starc. Bats at 8 usually. Starkey, I mean, he's kind of a weird character. It's sort of, I know his wife, Elisa Healy, pretty well. And I sort of think about the way couples are sort of like chalk and cheese. And I think they're kind of the epitome of that. Stark is quite a quiet person. He keeps his cards close to his chest. But I think he's very serious. Like, I mean, if you get him talking, he will give you some opinions. Like from my understanding, behind the scenes, doesn't take a back foot. But, you look at that counter with Elisa Healy, who's, charming and funny and outgoing and loves to, can go on TV and, the sort of yin and yang, the way they fit together. And I think, that gives me a sort of understanding of Starc. What do I think? I think some things about Starc are underrated, and I do think the way he put Australian cricket ahead of lucrative T20 contracts has not been appreciated enough by the public or by anyone really. Because you think about it, he could have probably earned another $10 or $20 million playing franchise cricket. And he'd have two $25 million houses now. I don't know if anyone heard that, but I think he bought a $25 million house in Sydney recently. So, yeah, Stark's an interesting character. As a cricketer, his bowling's hot and cold, but he's a wicket taker. He's a genuine wicket taker. He's a guy who can bowl two absolute stinkers of an over and then bowl an absolute unplayable delivery that gets the wicket. So sometimes you've just got to endure a few expensive spells for the eventual payoff. But as I said, just the way he put Australian cricket before his own needs, like he could have gone to the IPL the last 10 years, made a fortune, but he didn't. So I think it shows real commitment. And the fact that he's sort of approaching 100 tests, I think he's high 80s now for a fast bowler. You do not do that unless you work exceptionally hard behind the scenes. And I guess my takeaway from Stark is I respect his quiet, industrious work ethic. He doesn't go in front of the media. He's not a big Mitchell Stark brand guy. He's just all about the cricket, doing well, and yeah, big ups to Mitchell Stark. Pat Cummins, captain, batting at number 9. I mean, it's hard to criticize Cummins. I mean, just a all-round terrific guy. Been on the podcast, and I've said this story before, but he's one of the few cricketers that really took a keen interest in how the podcast turned out, how he sounded, what he could have done better. A lot of cricketers come up. Well, they're all really nice, but he was very concerned with how the end product sounded, and I thought, it showed a real thoughtfulness about him that is then flowed into the way he leads the team. He's very thoughtful. He had his own ideas about how he wanted the team to function, and he's able to superimpose those values onto the team. What are those values? It's more about team harmony, and I guess as well, it's a bit more of an attitude that embraces the new professionalism of cricket. The fact that you've got players coming in and out of squads all the time. It's very much a professional sporting environment where individuals come together to play as a team rather than sort of a team traveling. It is a team traveling around together, but you look about it now, tours are so compact, squads are so different. So the test squad will come together just before the test series. The one-day squad will be back to their state. So I think his attitude of sort of fostering the environment of, post Langer being a bit more relaxed does suit that environment. So yeah, Cummins, great, obviously great cricketer. Not much you can say about his bowling that hasn't already been said. I don't like having fast bowlers test captains. I've said this many times, and I'm sorry, but I think I'm right. I think I'm 100% right on this, and I will not entertain any other ideas, because I still point to the issue is when games are really tight, which is when it fucking matters, like that's when the result is on the line, you don't want a fast bowler as your skipper. That's my issue, because you want them to just worry about bowling and their craft. You want a batter in the field to be skipper who can sort of detach himself a bit more from the action and see things a bit differently. I get there's arguments to that. Like Cummins has done a great job. There've been good fast bowling captains in the past. Look at Imran Khan. And you've also got to look at who else could do the job. Well, I said Steve Smith could do the job, but he didn't have a great run when he did it the first time. So you could argue with me and say, well, Cummins has done a better job than Smith did. I still disagree, because if you look at series when they get tight, our tactics have kind of been fucked. Like, look at Australia versus India in 2023. And I know Cummins had a lot going on off the field, but in the first 2 test matches, that was a complete disaster tactically from Australia. Picked the wrong teams, went about it all the wrong way, played all these crazy sweep shots. And then before we knew it, the series was gone. Smith takes over, we win the next match, draw the next game. And Cummins was struggling then. And I'm sure that had a lot to do with what was happening at home with his mum. So I've given him sympathy. But then, later that year in the Ashes, we started really well. I'll bet on the back of a pretty incredible partnership between Cummins and Lyon at Edgbaston. But we were 2-0 up. And then I just thought tactically went missing. And I just like a batter. I think it's better when you got a batter who can just see the game a little bit differently from a distance. And I do think as well, Cummins, as a fast bowler, quite rightly, is obsessed with keeping the bowlers fresh because that's the battle he faces. That's the battle of a modern cricketer and a modern fast bowler. You got to stay fresh, and there's so much cricket, and you got to manage your workloads and all that. But I think because he's a fast bowler, he focuses on that a bit too much, and so yeah. I mean, Cummins, great skipper, great person, wonderful face of Australian cricket, and there's no doubt he'll go down as a titan. And you can't argue with his success. World Cup 2023 winners, World Test Championship victors. So yeah, and then with the Langer thing, I will always believe he got that wrong. I will always believe he got that wrong, and I will always stick to the fact that I think the team would be in a better spot now if they'd kept Langer. I mean, you will never know. We will never know. But I'm sorry, you just can't convince me otherwise. I don't think the inmate should run the asylum. I think Langer had shown he changed enough to keep the job. And I kind of think we're seeing now with all this dithering around with everyone batting orders, like in the end, if you empower everybody to make their own decisions, sometimes that can get away from you. And yeah, so I will go to my dying on my deathbed. I'll be saying Langer should still be coach of Australia. All right, next one. So we've got Lyon batting at 10 at the moment for Australia. Sorry, so 8 was Stark, 9 was Cummins. I think I said Cummins at 9, but 8, he's at 9. So then you got Lyon at 10. Friend of the show, was on last summer. And just some feedback. As you might remember who listened to the interview with Nathan Lyon, I asked him questions. And I asked him questions that I thought the listeners wanted. Do the players run the team? I asked him all the criticisms that I hear about the Australian team because I think give him the opportunity to answer to this stuff. I don't know if he loved that line of questioning where I did asking those things, but fucking man up. You're an Australian cricketer. Like, you're going to be questioned about some of these things. And he handled them with aplomb. And I think he gave me a different perspective on the team and the way it's run. And, I do get the challenges of the modern professional athlete. Like, Lyon sort of seen the change. He came in 2010 and now 14 years later he's still playing. I think he can see where maybe in 2010 it was more sort of a group that was on tour together a lot and longer tours, and there was a sort of different environment to now a professional environment, as I said before, where people come and go. And I think Malcolm Conn said it's more like individual professionals coming together and then they go off again, rather than before it was more like the Australian team. So I think, but Lyon, I mean, terrific guy. He has become a real statesman as a cricketer in our country. I think he's really learnt in the last few years the way he wants to carry himself as a representative of the Australian cricket team. And, he's a very good diplomat now. He wasn't always like that. He got killed before the 2017-18 Ashes series because he said that this Australian team wanted to end some careers of the English. And then after that, he got a lot of shit for that. But since then, he's kept pretty quiet. But, a very good representative, says the right things. What can you say about him? He's a bowler. I mean, he's the epitome of someone who's got the most out of their skills, someone who works hard. I can tell you from what I've seen, I mean, he goes back to New South Wales cricket and bowls 100 overs, puts the Baggy Blues, just works so hard for the Baggy Blues. So, yeah, I mean, Lyon wants to get to the 2027 Ashes series. I can see it happening. And there are a couple of spinners kind of just nipping at his heel, Rockacholi, Todd Murphy. But I would say they'd have to do a lot to dislodge him. And I like Nathan Lyon. I mean, He's a terrific guy. The way he works for different charities, the way he conducts himself around children, he is such a good representative of this Australian team, and a lot of them are. I've said it. A lot of them are great guys, and Lyon as a cricketer has just developed so strongly over the years. Like his bowling gets better and better every year, and coming into this summer, when Cameron Green got injured, that's more pressure now on Nathan Lyon because he's going to be like, okay, we need you to bowl more overs now. So stay tuned for that. And finally, Josh Hazlewood, number 11, friend of the show, been on a few times. I think Hazlewood is an absolute ripper. I think he's one of the most underrated bowlers in world cricket. You look at the way he succeeds at all formats. I don't think he's quite at Bumrah's level, but I think he's not far behind in being an all format bowler. So let's put a few comparisons together. Cummins, very good all format bowler, but not nearly as good at T20 cricket as Hazlewood. But I think everything else, Hazlewood's probably pretty close to Cummins, test level, everything. There's not much between them. Mitchell Starc, exceptional white ball bowler, but his test bowling is not quite at the standard of Cummins or Hazlewood's. So, Hazlewood could make a case for being the best all-format bowler in the Australian team and one of the best in the world. And, what I like about Hazlewood, he is just your typical boy from the country. I think he's from Bendemeer in country New South Wales. He just tells it like it is. Get him in a press conference, get him on this podcast, go and listen to it if you had him on a couple of times. He'll just talk to you like a mate. And again, can't praise him highly enough for the way he conducts himself around the place. Always has a smile on his face, always friendly, and just a consummate professional. Just a typical country lad, says what he thinks, works so hard. And he was really unlucky in 2019 not to be in Australia's World Cup squad. So that was, a real miss by the Australians then. But, since then that pushed him to work on his white ball game. And now he's, as I said, probably Australia's best all format bowler. And what else about Hazlewood? There's not much to say about Hazlewood just because he's so steady. And I can see him going on a few more years, he and Cummins. I think Stark's a bit older than them, so he might go first. But love Josh Hazlewood. And, you sort of look at that unit together of Hazlewood, Cummins and Stark, and then add Lyon, that contingent of 4 New South Wales bowlers that have put together this world record combination of wickets between them. They're the most successful foursome in cricket's history. We should step back and appreciate what they've been able to do for such a long time. I mean, you go back to that 2017, 2018 Ashes series where I think they played all of it apart from one where Jackson Bird came in. And they've done it a number of times. This attack has carried Australia through a number of successful series. And, we'll look back on this foursome, I think, as, the best quartet we've ever seen together. There's no doubt Warner McGrath are better than all those bowlers, all of them. I mean, Warren's the king. McGrath, I'll take McGrath over all 3 of those bowlers any day of the week. But they didn't have the foursome that this attack has. So Dizzy, Jason Gillespie was part of, that attack for a long time, and he was, just a phenomenal bowler. So, but they didn't have there was a very small period where it was Kasparitz, McGrath, and Gillespie and Warne. That was an awesome foursome, not the rowers, an awesome foursome bowling attack. But they didn't stay together as long, and I think Brett Lee came in. So I think when we look back at this quartet of New South Wales bowlers, we'll go, wow, that was something special. And I think we should appreciate it going into this Border-Gavaskar trophy because it might be their last summer together. You would imagine they make it through to the Ashes, but when you're their age, you're only one injury from being career ended. If Stark does some injury, that could be him done. So, so that's my sort of summation of sort of inside the Australian cricket team, sort of what I've seen covering them over 10 years. Love to hear your feedback on it. So, of course, Cricket Unfiltered is on all podcast apps. Please rate and review the podcast. In the show notes, there's a link to the Patreon page. If you want a completely ad-free version of this show, then you can subscribe on Patreon. You get an ad-free version. So go back and listen to the Malcolm Conn interview. I'll be back next week with Damien and Daniel. Weekly show, got a lot of news to catch up on from around the world. So we'll certainly get into that. But thanks everybody for listening to Mad Menners, my weekly dose of Mad Menners. And we'll be back soon.